Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Nicole Lim. Thank you for joining us today. Tonight, I'll be walking you through our fall capstone project for this semester on electrifying fleets in Hunts Point. I'll specifically be talking about our task, early findings, and followed by our assessment of the current state of electrification in Hunts Point, then a summary of our deliverables, and finishing with our results and recommendations for our client, Electrifying New York. Speaking about Electrifying New York, they are a coalition of non-governmental organizations and transportation associations in New York State banding together to fight for clean, equitable, and electric transportation, along with other social and environmental justice issues. The coalition is made up of these 12 amazing organizations, and they have tasked us with identifying opportunities and blueprinting a framework to accelerate the electrification of medium and heavy-duty fleets operating at the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center. And the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center is one of the busiest and largest food distribution centers in the world. Naturally, there's a plethora of in and outgoing traffic in the area, especially because the Bruckner and Sheridan Expressway bisects the neighborhood. And most of this outbound traffic are medium and heavy duty vehicles. Now, this results in a large cocktail of air pollution, particularly a high concentration of particulate matter 2.5, which exacerbates existing respiratory issues like asthma. And Hunts Point is in fact an asthma hotspot in the city. As you can see, there is a direct correlation between the high concentrations of particulate matter 2.5 and a disproportionately high rate of asthma hospitalizations, especially and unfortunately with children under 15 years old. So in order to directly solve the problem and lay down a groundwork for truck electrification, we conducted stakeholder interviews, performed literature reviews, and researched a lot of the technological advancements in the truck industry. I did a field trip to the Hunts Point community, which it is an environmental justice community. When developing our strategies, we made sure to think about how the local community will be part of an equitable electric vehicle transition and how to best prepare the community and its stakeholders for fleet electrification. So what we uncovered was a complex web of truck ownership. There are many vendors in the food distribution center, and they're using a variety of independent truck companies. What we also realized is that incoming traffic is coming from everywhere. And there's a lot of complex routes and logistics across state lines. And most of this traffic are heavy duty long haul trucks. We currently lack operational control. So until vehicle electrification becomes more commonplace, we should focus on medium duty trucks that are more compatible with the existing technology. There are many potential opportunities for public-private partnerships and policy enactments and chances to better organize incentives. So after completing all our research and outreach, how did we achieve our final deliverables? Well, we started by consolidating all our findings and setting the stage, painting the full picture of the current state of electrification in Hunts Point. There's presently minimal electrification in the area. And if there is electrification, it's mostly your light duty passenger vehicles like your Nissan Leafs, your Chevy Bolts, and even your Teslas. There's a small amount of fully electrified medium duty trucks in the area. For example, A2E Pile, the company, has a tiny fleet of electric medium duty fleet in the area, but they really only go 60 miles per charge. Katzman, one of the largest vendors in the food distribution center that produces produce, has partnered with the New York City Economic Development Corporation to deploy on-site detachable and mobile electric refrigerated containers. Now, this is not a fully electric truck, but it shows that the concept of electrification is gaining traction in the community. Range and upfront costs are certainly main concerns for vendors and drivers, and there is currently piecemeal charging infrastructure in Hunts Point. So medium heavy duty vehicles need at least level 3 or direct current fast chargers, more commonly known as DC fast chargers. As you can see in Hunts Point or even in the vicinity, there are none of them, no level or DC fast chargers. So to alleviate the health issues in the community, specifically via electrifying truck fleet, we need to first identify and then close some gaps. To identify the gaps, we created a spider diagram on the left to assess ecosystem readiness. And ecosystem readiness is essentially the fitness of the Hunts Point community, its stakeholders, and the environment to undergo the electrification. The spider diagram that you see was based off 7 criteria, and the further away the edges are from the perimeter of the septagon, the larger the gap. From our outreach process, we found that most vendors are actually really progressive and they're open to fleet electrification. The real problem is that charging stations are just non-existent in the area. And as you can see, this is the biggest gap to fill. There's also limited availability of suitable trucks within the market, and there's a lack of investment in research and development for specifically medium and heavy duty trucks. In New York State, the political and business landscape can support an electric vehicle transition. However, incentives are just only for light duty vehicles currently, and manufacturers and agencies are not incentivized to think about electrifying trucks right now. And this is probably because there's no limited or even close to mandated policies about electric trucks. And this is probably because they're not yet fully commercialized. So how did we fill in the identified gaps that I mentioned? Well, we produced several deliverables for our client. First, a case study report, then a toolkit comprising of a robust consolidated policy and incentive fact sheet, a charging infrastructure primer brochure, policy matrix, a detailed roadmap, and a final report with targeted recommendations. As you can see, we have done quite a lot this semester, but it just highlights some of our main takeaways from our deliverables. From our case studies, we selected successful but relevant tactics, and we reviewed and applied them to the context of our project. We looked to the city of Oakland, where they actually implemented a small surcharge fee on registered diesel vehicles, and this generated $22 million a year. And that money was being used to fund vehicle emission reduction projects in the city. Additionally, Oakland implemented an advanced clean trucks regulation that actually set zero emission standards for tractor trailers, pickup trucks, delivery trucks, and vans by 2035. Although California is obviously very different from New York City in many ways, we can look to Oakland for inspiration. We looked to the city of Houston as well, and their fleet was centrally managed, and there was a robust charging infrastructure based on a lot of vehicle route dynamics. And the capitalization of federal funding has also allowed Houston to successfully transition to electric vehicles, improve their operational efficiency, and create significant return. From developing the toolkit, we realized that although current policies and incentives are really catered to light-duty electric vehicles, they can certainly be adapted to all vehicles. And based on the effectiveness and ineffectiveness of some policies and incentives from the toolkit, we recommend our client Electrifying New York to take a bottom-up approach, starting with the expansion of the charging infrastructure via utilities and private companies. This would really provide a solid foundation for electric vehicles in New York City. As you move up the pyramid, you see that Electrifying New York's potential influence narrows. The likelihood of policy intervention for them really shrinks. So we suggest they put their initial efforts at the base of the pyramid. We also developed a roadmap to visualize our recommendations and provide a timeframe for the optimal rollout. In the short term, an electric vehicle toolkit and policy matrix needs to be utilized to demystify the complex sets of policies and incentives. In the medium term, Electrifying New York should also advocate for the expansion of existing policies and incentives to specifically include medium and heavy duty vehicles. And obviously, of course, advocate for generating revenue streams. In the long term, Electrifying New York can also assist in the fleet replacement program, promote expansion of charging infrastructure, and support partnerships that would provide equitable access for workforce training. Based on our calculations, electrifying just 5% of Hunts Point's outbound traffic will result in $2.2 million worth of annual savings, both in fuel savings and operations and maintenance costs. It will also reduce the annual particulate matter 2.5 number by 80 kilograms and avoid $300,000 of social costs in the community. So as you can see, electrifying fleet does have a significant positive impact and benefits for the community. So in conclusion, we have 5 fundamental recommendations for our final report. First off, Electrifying New York will have to provide access and disseminate the toolkit to the relevant stakeholders. Second, they can advocate to align existing policies and incentives to cater specifically to medium and heavy duty vehicles. For example, businesses could negotiate with utilities to have their optimum rate schedules and lower their demand side costs related to DC fast charging. Thirdly, they could identify revenue streams so that they can provide their stakeholders and prove to them that this investment is worthwhile and sustainable. For example, they could mimic California's method of implementing a surcharge. Fourthly, they could recommend We recommend that Electrifying New York develop local talent and train people for electric vehicle driving, manufacturing, and operations and maintenance. Actually, many unions and transportation consortiums are already training the next generations of techs to operate these specific vehicles. And lastly, Electrify New York should do what it does best, reach out to its vast network of NGOs and transportation alliances, public agencies and private companies, and even the newly elected and progressive Congressman, Richie Torres. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer all your questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Great presentation. So again, if folks have questions, please enter them in the chat or raise your hand in the participants list. I'll just give folks a couple minutes here to formulate their thoughts. Okay, Professor Charles Guzman, I see you have a question.
Hi, Nicole, thank you for your presentation. You did a great job. I am wondering if you can build a bit on your reflections on cost issues, right? So your cost slide mentioned initial upfront cost as a barrier and the fact that the electric vehicles are not yet commercialized as your big issues. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about O&M, operations and maintenance costs. If it is that the cost of electricity is more than, for example, diesel fuel for these trucks and the older fleets, are there policy changes that the team may have proposed or presented to the client for them to advocate for either at the city or state level to kind of bridge this gap?
Yeah, so to tackle the upfront cost issue, that's the whole point of the policy matrix. So essentially, we laid down many local, state, and federal policies and basically showed how, to our client, how we can adapt those policies specifically to medium and heavy duty fleet. And that policies also include incentives. So incentivizing the transition to these medium and heavy duty fleet will help with the upfront cost. To address your question about operation and maintenance, historically, operation and maintenance, once obviously they're fully commercialized and deployed, operations and maintenance for these electric vehicles are lower than their diesel counterparts. Yeah. I'm sorry, were there, do you mind repeating your question again?
No, that's fine. Just in terms of the fuel cost difference, maybe between diesel and electricity, I was wondering if there was an ongoing kind of delta there that the team wanted to speak about.
So that was out of our scope. Essentially, what we did was to look at current policies and try to see how we can tailor them specifically to target the upfront cost first. And then once that's commercialized, then in our roadmap, we do also say, once that happens, how do we tackle, charging costs and O&M? So that's all mentioned in our final report.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have a question from Russell Hyatt. Russell?
Oh, sorry, actually, Kizzy just asked my question, but I have just another one that was just kind of a detail that I didn't think it was worth asking, but maybe I'll ask it now that I have the floor here. You mentioned the PM 2.5 was an 80 kilogram reduction. I was just curious, what's the baseline for that? Do you know offhand?
Yeah, no, good question. So we looked specifically at this document called it's called FLEET for its acronym. I thought it was actually kind of cute. It's the Alternative Fuel Life Cycle Environmental and Economic Transportation document, very long acronym. But essentially, we did it in a very specific way. We calculated, well, in that report, that they actually detailed the decrease of PM 2.5 for certain electric fleet. And this number was based off the New York truck voucher incentive program as well. So that's how we got the numbers from, and we did the math from there.
Thank you.
Great. I am not seeing any additional questions, so thank you so much, Nicole. Next.